So about me, I'm having around 9 years experience in the field of IT automation. So I started my career in 2011, and so during that time you don't have any of these DevOps related tools like Jenkins. Jenkins is just initiated at that time in 2011, and Ansible, Chef, all these are very rudimentary at that time. They are not even started. So at that point of time, whatever the automation we used to do for these build activities or for operations or anything, we used to do everything using Linux shell scripting for Unix or Linux related operating systems, and even for Mac. And for Windows, we used to use PowerShell and VBScript mostly. So whatever the operations we used to do today using Jenkins or Ansible or any configuration management, everything we used to do by our own scripting language. From it's like we are writing the code from scratch to implement all these activities which we used to follow at that time. Later, as we grow along with the project, like after 2 to 3 years of experience, all these DevOps related tools came into the ecosystem of this IT environment, and we started using that. So from there onwards, I have worked with multiple banking systems projects, and I have worked with many insurance related and pharmaceutical related clients also. During these multiple projects, I have invested my time on different types of tools available in this DevOps environment, and we as a team we have implemented from scratch everything. Okay, so it's like around 9 years, and I have worked at four different companies so far. And present, I'm starting working with a startup. And near future, I might start working as a consultant directly. Present, I am a DevOps architect in my current organization, and also I am an Udemy author. I have published multiple courses on PowerShell and Python, uh, and I worked with some other small institutes uh, as an independent role, so that I used to provide online trainings to them directly. So this is so far my small introduction about me. Let's coming to the course. Let's start with the course contents first. Then we can dive into the individual subtopics of that one. Is that okay? I hope so.
Sorry, first you'll start with?
I will start with the course contents. Then we'll go with the topics.
Okay, okay. One second, Ganapati.
Yeah. 1 minute. Yeah. So this is my blog I used to maintain for all the production issues and even training related. Uh, so if you go to the DevOps training here, so this is bit old, like 2 years old concept. So on top of this, I have removed some contents and also added some more content to the topics. So I will explain them. So yeah, with the starting of the course, like first 2 3 days, I will explain about the DevOps methodologies and how it is implemented and how it is different. What will be the exact part to the students if they got placed in this one, and the different types of tools available in this one, and how they are interrelated, and how they are linked with different stages of development or testing or production activities. So by introducing DevOps, I will just before that I will just start with the different types of software methodologies available till that date, and how DevOps is a solution to that one, to the problems being raised. So once the architecture of DevOps is completed, I will start with Linux shell scripting, because that is most predominantly used everywhere, and most of the servers we used to, yeah. So someone asked something, no? So,
No, no, no.
okay. So most of the servers, even in whether in the cloud or even in the a cloud service like AWS or Amazon or some Azure or Google Cloud or anything, or even in your local office servers, for most of the backend applications will be running mostly in the Linux operating systems. So that's why it's better to start with the Linux shell scripting. And once people are good enough with the shell scripting, then I will explain different variants of scripting languages available: Python, Groovy, and PowerShell. Groovy is mostly used in Jenkins only. So after giving a basic introduction of Groovy, I will explain the more advanced concepts of Groovy when I explain Jenkins and the pipelines in the CI/CD tools. And PowerShell is an alternative for Linux shell scripting on Windows operating system mostly. So, and even now they are providing an option to install PowerShell on Linux operating system also. So this is the major project of Microsoft now. So slowly the Linux shell scripting will also be replaced by PowerShell only. But as of now, to stick with the current jobs, I will explain both Linux shell scripting and PowerShell also. And Python, it's like a runtime on whichever operating system you install, you can directly run these Python scripting languages. So it's picky. Some projects where the Windows machines are majorly involved, they use PowerShell mostly than with the Python. And Python mostly involved in the projects where this data science related applications are there. And in that environment, to handle the DevOps also, we used to use mostly with the Python only. So in our course, I will be explaining about 4 different scripting languages: PowerShell, Python, Groovy, and the Linux shell scripting. And Vagrant is just used for test environments. Mostly they won't be using in the production also. They might be using in some POCs, but they won't be using much in the production environments. So I will cover Vagrant in a 1-hour session instead of going deeply into that, so that students, whoever they want to involve more into the Vagrant, I can refer them with the links and the Q&A section kind of. And along with the scripting languages, in the DevOps ecosystem, we used to maintain source code in some repositories like version control systems like Git, SVN, and CA Harvest. It's a paid tool. So I will be explaining Git in depth because in multiple projects I worked in the migration from different source code repositories to Git directly. So there are some projects in the market still where they are extensively searching only for Git other than any DevOps tools. So that's why I will concentrate at least 3 to 4 sessions on Git directly. And Ant is the whole tool mostly used for compilation of Java projects, and it's a classical tool, I mean to say. But nowadays most of the projects will be using Maven, and some are moving to Gradle also. But in this course I will stick with Maven. And after that I will explain this containerization tools like Docker. And for orchestration of this Docker containers in the production environment, some projects they use Docker Swarm. It is easy to implement, and to make it more scalable, in many projects they are using a Google product, Kubernetes, and mostly in the cloud with the AWS or GCP, not with Azure mostly. So after the Docker sessions, I will take a half session on Swarm. That would be more than enough. Then we will go with the Kubernetes directly. That Kubernetes topics I think I didn't include here. I will share that separately because that is the latest one, because earlier I used to explain everything in the Swarm. So in the cloud computing thing, I have worked with both AWS and Azure. It's like in our environments, Azure is cost effective generally, but for scalability and more security, AWS is being suitable for the production environments. So that's why in majority of the environments they will be using Azure in the development environments and AWS in the production environments. So but in this part of course I will be explaining AWS because There are other opportunities only for AWS also as AWS admin. So, but I won't be covering majority of the concept in AWS. I will be covering this EC2 instances service and RDS and container service ECS, and one more container service is there called Fargate as a next option to this ECS. Fargate also I will explain. Other than this, the extra thing is Fargate. Yeah, and there is one more concept recently introduced by Amazon. I mean, not recently, around 2-3 years back. But during this lockdown time, majority of the companies are opting to the service called as workspaces, which is not available in any of the courses right now. I will explain this workspaces concept, which is mostly used in the work from home environment. It's just an alternative to Citrix environment, Citrix Zenap. And I will give you a basic introduction of Azure so that they can set up their test environments and work from there. And other than this AWS and Azure, mostly they will be having their own images of operating systems and all. To customize that and to implement our own custom images so that it will be suitable for our environment with the related softwares, we will be using Packer to create the images and Terraform to automate the deployment to the cloud environment. And Terraform I will be explaining as part of AWS and also for vSphere also. vSphere is the local environment on any offices mostly. It's a VMware virtual environment. So I will show you how to handle vSphere also with Terraform. So it will be an asset to that one. And for configuration management, there are mostly 3 different tools in the market: Chef, Puppet, and Ansible. Now recently, because of the PowerShell implementation to the Linux, they started using PowerShell DSC. This PowerShell DSC is mostly used in Windows-based DevOps courses. You can see of Windows-based DevOps environments. Here, mostly the servers, everything will be linked with the Active Directory of Windows servers, and instead of using the Linux servers, they will be using Server 2018, Server 2012, like that. In that environment, they will be using PowerShell DSC, and now Ansible being supported to Windows also as a client operating systems, but the major server will be in the Linux. So in this course, I will be covering mostly the Ansible and an introduction to the Puppet. Okay, two tools I will be covering, and the differences between Ansible and Puppet also, how it is different, the full push model and all. And to integrate the different tools in the DevOps environment, we will be using Jenkins to wire up everything there. And in most of the courses, they will be just creating one sample project, and it's a freestyle job they will create, and they will just execute one build, and they used to end the course. Instead, in my course, I will take extensive details in Groovy and the Jenkins pipeline. And even in the Jenkins pipeline, there is a customization available with a plugin called Blue Ocean. With that one, in a more sophisticated in the logged environment, you can create the Jenkins pipeline. I will show you that also. Yeah, Kubernetes I included at the end. I will explain you how to deploy Kubernetes, and even I will show you if an existing environment is there in Docker Swarm, how to migrate that completely to a Kubernetes environment from local to cloud or cloud to local. That import and export, everything I will show you. And for monitoring, like see, for environment setup and all, we will be using Ansible and all, but when the environment is working properly and some issues happen, and when we are not able to sustain, then we used to use a monitoring tool to check the status exactly what is happening to the background services or systems or the network activities and all. That one previously we used to do with a Nagios, and Nagios is a very full-fledged tool. There is a separate Nagios administrators also available every time, but instead of using this, we will be using Prometheus now. It is simple tool. And there are many plugins in Prometheus through which we can directly link up with the AWS environment also instead of the local one. But the similar setup with Nagios is complicated there. So that's why many providers are using Prometheus now. So I will explain Prometheus and the related portals to that one. So that's all. So if so the last one, whether Prometheus or Nagios, is up to you guys. Like if you want to explain me the Nagios, I will explain the Nagios. If you want to explain me the Prometheus, we will cover the Prometheus. Or I will explain one of that, and I will give a basic introduction of the other tool, a simple lab setup kind of. So this is the course content so far, and through AWS, as AWS, I will be concentrating only 2 to 3 sessions in this course. So that's why I didn't provide much concepts here. But I used to provide a separate course for AWS administrator, where they won't be working on many DevOps tools. They will be just sticked with the AWS portal, and they will be working with the Terraform or AWS CloudFront. So these are the concepts I will be explaining there. I will start with S3, EC2, load balancing, and the DNS configuration, CloudWatch for logging, and CloudFormation for templates, binge type migration tools, and even setting up Docker environment there, everything. And these are not limited. As the new services are being added, they will be added to the course also. So this is for the course content so far. So any doubts, guys, till now? Guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, yes.
Yeah.
So you can proceed. And you're saying like forget, what is it? Forget?
Forget. Yeah,
Forget, yeah.
Yeah.
Forget is different and forget is different.
No. ECS is a container service provided by AWS. There what happens is, even though we are using, AWS is creating the containers for us, I mean the Docker containers, the main servers where the Docker is running should be managed by us only. But in the Fargate, the server will be managed by AWS people. We don't need to worry about the network configurations and all. That is the next concept to ACS. But the costing will be a bit different there. So every time based on the usage, we will be using either Fargate or ECS, because see, in ECS what happens is the cost will be based on the number of servers we are using. But in Fargates, the cost will be based on number of containers we will be using. So there is a cost difference, mostly the structure difference. But the end, for a student, it is just an optional, just how the configuration should be done in the AWS portal. That one I will show you. It's not a problem. Fargate is like the burden will be decreased on the AWS administrator if they are using Fargate, because it is being maintained by the AWS people itself. So did you get my point?
Yes.
Yeah, it's an alternative to ECS, Elastic Container Service.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alternate of ECS. Okay.
Yeah. And even in Fargate, we need to use the same ECR. There is no difference. ECR is same there for maintaining the repositories. And coming to the DevOps overview, yeah, I just provided an overview of what are the different types of, I just categorized the different types of tools available here. Like for scripting languages, we'll be using Python and shell scripting, and I need to add PowerShell also. And build tools, I will be using Ant and Maven. Virtualization, VirtualBox with Vagrant, yeah. And I will be using ESX also, because I am having access to one of the test environment. I can show you that to the people, because companies mostly will be using VMware ESX only, or vSphere. And continuous integration, it's Jenkins is a tool which will be not specific to one particular methodology, it will be there in complete DevOps ecosystem. Everywhere it will be included, and it will be used for wiring up all the things. Using Docker, yeah, orchestration using Kubernetes and Docker Swarm. And Puppet, and there is some marketing methodology came into the DevOps courses, where they are keeping the course name as Windows DevOps. So when I cross checks what is the difference available there, what they are doing is they are removing some set of tools. Instead of Ansible and Puppet, they are providing only PowerShell DSC. Okay. And they are using Windows servers every time instead of using the Linux servers, and mostly instead of using Linux shell scripting, they are using PowerShell only. So in this course I will provide both, and in some other places instead of Jenkins they might be using other tools, even that is also fine. And there is a new concept provided by Azure called as Azure DevOps, where they have implemented Jenkins, the Jenkins pipeline and all, and even the source code repositories, the GitHub, and even many other wiring tools like Nagios, Prometheus. It is remote because Azure's own implementation of logging will be there at that time. So they added more multiple tools, and everything they have kept in a single tool called as Azure DevOps. So instead of using Jenkins pipeline there, you will be using Azure pipelines. So the concept will be same. If the person takes our DevOps course and if they started working on Azure, the pipelines and all those concepts will be mostly similar here and there. Yeah. So in this today's course, let's start with the topic of an introduction to DevOps. Why is this DevOps is used exactly, and all. So before starting the DevOps, we need to see what are the different types of approaches generally the software development followed till the early 90s. So they used a concept called waterfall model, where once the product is once a project is confirmed from the customer, let's say I want to create one a banking website. So the first thing is a requirement analysis, where the software architect and designer, they will approach the and business analysts who are having domain knowledge, and the software architect is the technical person. So both will approach the customers, and they will take the requirement analysis, like they will take the what exactly the product should like and how the customers are expecting that. All that related details will be collected by them, and they will prepare a separate design from that one. Once the design is created, they will split that design into multiple modules and divide it to different teams of development. Let's say some 200 people are there, they will divide it to 5 members of individual teams with their team leaders and all, and they provide to them, and they start implementing that one. Once the implementation is done, the testing team, once the product is ready, they will start the testing of that one. Once the test phase is done, if there is any issues, they will get back to the implementation team. If not, they will send it to the deployment. Once the deployment is done at the production environment, where at the customer site on the machines, if there is any issues in the production, the maintenance and support team will come into the contact, and they will do the minor fixes and everything. And if there is any new features to be included, again the requirement gatherers analysis will take care. So this is simple so far. So clean and clean, we don't need to worry much about that. Theoretically it is very good, but practically what happened is, when it comes to reality, the first stage of requirement gatherers analysis, let's say it took some 5 days of time or 1 week, let's say. Then the design, it took, let's say, some 15 days. Then the implementation, the real part of code, will take at least, let's say, some 6 months. Once the 6 months part is completed, then the testing phase will start. The testing phase, as they need to do different parts of testing like unit testing, functional testing, everything. So let's say it will take some 2 months of time. There some teams will take even more than that. Once the testing is done, it will go to the deployment. So by the time it goes to the deployment, it's like almost 9 months, nearly 9 months of time, right? So in this 9 months of time, there may be change in the technologies. Let's say in the current, they might be using some AngularJS from past 2 years. But in the last 2 years, instead of doing AngularJS, people are shifting to React.js. Like that, the technologies may get advanced, and by the time when we produce it to the customer, he might not he don't like that product. Mostly he will think it's an older technology, and he don't want, and mostly he will feel like he received some bad product kind of, or even he might ask to do some changes also. So in that case, again we need to start from the scratch, and again we need to stay next 9 to 10 months of process. So because of this delay in the contact, and also there is no direct connectivity between the two environments, different stages, because while the implementation is being done, the testing team, they won't contribute to anything to the product. So mostly they will be idle. So the resource utilization is also going waste there. So that's why at the end the product is not much suitable for the deployment, or the product is mostly the useless kind of. So that's why these are the limitations of waterfall model. So the thing is, let's say if it is a civil engineering kind of, once a particular customer provides approaches some construction company, and if they given a contract of 1 year to build a apartment, then within this 1 year, every month he can go and cross check what is the progress of the product. He can see how many slabs are implemented, whether the construction is 50% done or 20% done, like that. But in the software product, till it is 100% ready, customer won't have any working product. Till the 9 months or 10 months of period, we don't have any piece of software to show to the customer. So this is how the product is running like that. So that is the main disadvantage of waterfall model. And of course there is high amounts of risk and uncertainty whether the product will be completed or not. So for smaller projects like a simple websites, as smaller projects, or for blogs or anything, this waterfall model is simple enough. But for major projects which is spanning around 2 to 3 years like that, this is not a good one. There is a high risk. So that's why, to change the limitations of this waterfall model, what they did is they moved to agile methodology. Agile methodology, it is not a different approach, it is the same as waterfall model, but they have splitted this product into multiple smaller parts and multiple smaller teams, so that for every 15-20 days, once the product is released, they will show the sample execution to the customer, so that the customer will also be as part of the team now. So this is agile methodology. You can see here the multiple product features are, let's say our product is having 10 features. Instead of delivering in a single phase of 10 features in waterfall model, they are splitting it to multiple features, like three features for every sprint. That stage is called a sprint here. So for every sprint, they will you can see the stages here: test, build, plan. All these are similar to the waterfall model only, but instead of using a single waterfall model, we are using multiple sprints here. So for every sprint, we will follow this complete waterfall kind of stages only here, but at the end of sprint, they will demonstrate to the customer, like these are the features will be available, like that, like a prototype kind of they will show to them. So based on the customer feedback, if you ask any changes, they will again add to the add those to the documentation, and they will add it to the next sprint as new feature. So in this case, for every sprint, customer will be having some workable product to demonstrate, to be in safe zone. So the risk will be less. But what will the, so this is the agile methodology. in a simple. So the main thing is it's being split to multiple teams and multiple feature based sprints by agile methodology. But what is the disadvantage of agile? In the production point of view, this agile is good enough, people are still using agile. But with agile, what happens is the major problem is the environment, right? Let's say I have created a desktop application. uh, let's say for the desktop application I have used a C++ programming language, and that too I am using Microsoft libraries. So for using the Microsoft libraries, I need Visual Studio for the development, and along with the Visual Studio I purchased many third-party libraries and I added to this my development system. Let's say this is some Windows 10 machine. So this one you can term it as VC++. It's Microsoft implementation of C++. So it's like this complete setup itself. Let's say I'm using Visual Studio 2017, VC++ 2017. I mean Visual Studio 2017. So this setup itself will take around 30 to 40 GB minimum. So for development environment, the developer needs this one. He will implement the code and he will finally he will create an executable, so that people can install this and they can use that one. Let's say some VLC player. Let's say once this VLC player 1.0 is released, or while it is still in the prototype as it is a sprint, we will provide to the test team. But in the testing team in the Windows 10 environment, they won't be including all this Visual Studio or Microsoft libraries or third-party libraries or anything. They will just include these runtimes of VC++ some 2017, so that instead of here they will be containing compiler, debugger, many things which is mainly used for development teams. But in testing team, they just need to test this VLC player. They don't need all these tools. So they will just install this VLC player 1.0. But once this VLC player is installed, they might be getting some issues because the environment is completely different here. So they will contact the development team, and the first reply they used to get from is, it is working in their environment, that is related to our environment only, they are not related to that one. Then again we need to connect a meeting with the operations, development team people, and need to see what exactly the prerequisites available for this VLC player. Let's say some VC++ 2017 it is missing. We need to download that, install that, and it is working fine. Once it is done, again we will be sending it to operations team, and the similar setup for Windows 10. Every time we'll be end up with the troubleshooting their operating systems, we'll be troubleshooting their laptops first of all, just to make sure our product is deployed correctly in their environments. Once it is deployed correctly, then they start the real testing. So 50% of the time is wasted just for the environmental issues. So to segregate this and provide a solution to this one, this continuous integration and continuous deployment tools came into existence, where instead of directly deploying, we will be using support of Ansible or Puppet, this one. So the deployment will be taken care by these tools directly. So similarly, even in the development also, one particular team will be working on some 10 function features and another person will be working on 10 different features. To have a workable product, again they need to merge all these features and create a single product. Again that is called as integration or integration testing. That integration testing may fail. So that's why instead of doing it once in a while, they want to do it continuously, like during the non-working hours. Every time when the multiple teams are working on different features, once the features are ready, they will merge into the source code repository of master branch. Once the master branch is ready, in the non-working hours, these Jenkins tools or any other different tools like TeamCity or even Microsoft's cloud platform anywhere. So they this TeamCity or Jenkins, they will start compiling automatically once the codes are merged to the master branch, and even they will do some automated tests also for the functionality testing. So this integration of multiple features being taken care by the Jenkins automatically. So every time there is a merge to the code, Jenkins will take care of that one in the test environment. So these kind of tools are called as continuous integration tools. That's why. And Jenkins is not just for continuous integration. Because of these different types of plugins available, they will be used in different purposes also. It is some kind of infrastructure automation orchestration now. Jenkins is mostly used for. And even in our organization, currently we are producing different database environments through Docker containers in a local servers. And every time user want to request that, the development team, they might not having a knowledge on Docker. They just need a database connection details. So that's why what we'll do is all the Docker commands, everything will be run directly from the Jenkins in the background, and a testable database details will be emailed to them directly. So these kind of automations also can be done by the Jenkins. I will explain more about them in the Jenkins case studies. So this is the agile limitations I told it. So not only development and testing, even the operation teams, like the persons in the pre-sales or sales department who are directly connected to the customers, they are completely non-technical. They don't know anything about troubleshooting their operating system or installation or anything. For that, again, we need to send a document, and they need to cross-check the document, and they need to replicate the steps. If they miss one or two steps, again there should be again some meetings to be connected to fix their operating systems. So that's why because of this Ansible and Puppet, this continuous deployment and management tools, it is easy to deploy in the operations team also, the non-technical guys. Because you can see, as the developer team, whenever there is an API change, their operating system changes, because the new upgrades, patches, everything they will install. And they will even now it is Visual Studio 2017 we are using. Let's say after now in the market 2019 is being implemented, immediately they will shift it to 2019. But to the operations team, they don't need this Visual Studio, they just need that VLC player. So for operations team, they need the stability more, they want the working product, they don't want to check any updates or anything. But in the development team, it is so rapid, their system changes very frequently. Even in that case also, they might create a service request if the system crashes or anything. So that's why they will be using the virtual environments every time. So for all these problems, we will be using DevOps because of the different types of ecosystem tools available. See, for the development, IT operations, and the QA team, all this will be in a single point of contact will be the DevOps team. So by applying the DevOps principles, and even some particular engineers will be there dedicated only for DevOps operations, they are mostly called as build engineers. They are the single point of contact for everything. They will manage all this infrastructure. The complete infrastructure part will be taken care by us, so that they can work on the product only directly. So DevOps is a kind of solution to the agile methodology issues. So in the DevOps, at a different stages of time, we will be having different tools available. Let's say here you can see, let's say this is a single sprint of agile. You can see in a single sprint I will be doing a first planning, then we will be doing the build, test, and review of that one. Similarly here in the planning, so planning is like the development team will be creating their own documentations on how the products should be implemented and all the issues of the current functionalities, whatever are fixed and whatever need to still in the pending. They cannot track everything in the normal MS Office documents or Excel sheets. So that's why they use a different tool for maintaining these bug fixes and features, and for time management and all, that is used by Jira. Jira is a tool for issue tracking mainly. This one we are having two different implementations. One is on-premise one, means from the Jira website we can download the software and we can install in our servers, and the software will be running in our servers. Another one is instead of installing in our servers, on our servers, we will be using Jira server only, their own server, and we'll be directly using their product. So in that case, that is an enterprise model, and we need to pay for them for using their server. Okay. Jira is mostly for bug fixing tracking, and like Jira there are many other commercial tools also. One more most famous one is CA Rally. CA is Computer Associates. Now it is changed to Broadcom. Now it is Broadcom Rally. It's a competitor to Jira. So once the features and everything is provided to the Rally or Jira, I will show you Jira, and I can show you interfaces of Rally also later. The UI is bit different, but all the functionality and everything will be same. It's just like we are using different bikes from different vendors, either Maruti, whether Hero Honda or TVS. The basic functionality will be same, the gear system and all. Only the minor UI changes will be there. So once the product planning and documentation, the feature sets and everything is ready, the Scrum team will be formed, and so the teams are called as Scrum teams, and because they used to have calls every time, and their test cases, the feature sets which they are implementing, they are called as sprints. So the sprint general duration will be 1 to 2 months max. So at the end of every sprint, they will do planning for the next sprint. What are the features to be implemented and all. Once the planning is done, it is documented in Jira. So once it is done, they will start developing, and the source code which they are developing, they can't keep it in the system. They need to keep in some common share place where different developers can be collaborate on multiple features commonly. So that particular thing is called as source code management tools. In this one, the most common one is SVN and Git, and few companies they will be using when they bought this Broadcom Rally, they are getting some kind of offers like having access to Harvest. Harvest is a Broadcom Harvest. It's also similar to Git. SVN and Harvest are central repositories. Git is a distributed one. I will tell you what is the distributed when I am explaining the Git concept. So in this course I will be explaining Git. And even I worked on some projects where the complete code is migrated from SVN to Git. So I will show you those migration commands also. SVN to Git. So, and once the code is being synced to the source code repositories every time, we need to compile the source code and create a workable product as a build engineer, because of the function integration testing kind of, because single features will be tested by the developer directly and the unit testing scripts, but the complex and embedded multiple features one will be should be integrated by us and tested. So for that we will be using, for building purposes, for building the code we will be using Maven or Ant, where we can wire up multiple commands, and so to make it automated, to do it automatically, we will be using Jenkins. The Jenkins, what happens is, it will be linked up with the source code. So whenever there is a source code change, Jenkins will automatically trigger this build scripts, and it will create a product. And also to automate the test phase also, because once the product is built, we need to do the test. Test can be a manual testing, which will be done by the individual testers, and another one is automated testing. As it is already automated, Jenkins will automatically trigger those scripts once the build is complete. So Jenkins is available here also in the testing phase also. Once the testing is done, we need to do the deployment. Okay, the deployment, for the deployment we can directly install them to the bare servers or direct machine servers, or we can deploy them to a containers like Docker. So whatever, whether it is a container or server, the deployment will be taken care by Ansible or Chef. And Salt Stack is a alternative to Ansible. It's an implementation of Python library. It is Puppet, Chef or Ansible will be taken care in deployment. And Vagrant we used to do in the test environments mostly, because it is having very limited features. So once the deployment is done, the operation phase, where the customers or the sales team or anything, whoever is working on that one, they will work on this one. So once the product is deployed, we need to check how it is working properly or not, whether it is taking many resources, how to analyze the resource utilization, and whether any services are crashing or not. All these things the end customer cannot demonstrate to us, because it is not understandable to him. So that's why we will be implementing this monitoring tools called as Nagios, Splunk. Splunk is mostly used in the cloud environments, Stack and all. So this is monitoring tools. Even in the monitoring tools also, if you want, we can wire it up with Jenkins, and through Jenkins we can start this monitoring tools thing, get for fetching the logs and all. So this is the complete DevOps ecosystem in a whole. And you can see Hudson here. That's why, as Jenkins is involved everywhere, I kept in the middle in the integration part. Along with the Jenkins, I have kept two different parts here, Bamboo and Hudson. Bamboo is an alternative to Jenkins created by Atlassian, the Bitbucket team. Bitbucket is so Hudson, earlier Jenkins was not there, only Hudson is available. But some part of team got branched out from Hudson, and they started creating Jenkins. And because of the community support, Jenkins became very popular. Earlier only Hudson is there, now no one is using Hudson, because even the product is available, very few people are using Hudson. So if you are having thorough knowledge on Jenkins, if you go to Hudson, it is just label changes there. All the UI and everything will be same. So coming to DevOps stages. So this is how the continuous monitoring I mentioned here, because this source code management will be taken care by the version control tools like Git, continuous integration, continuous delivery, deployment, all this taken care by Jenkins and Ansible, Puppet and all. So everywhere in all these stages we need to monitor. We can even in the development environment also we can sync with the monitoring tools, and we can check the statistics of that one. So that one can be taken care by Nagios or Prometheus or any different tools. If it is AWS, they have their own implementations of CloudWatch and all. So that is how. So this source code management, the different types of source code management and all, I will explain in the next session. I think it's almost 1 hour session. So any doubts guys till now, or let's say, or shall I cover this topic also?
Yeah, you can cover that topic.
Okay. So what is this source code management actually? I will show you. If you are working on different teams, multiple persons will be working on multiple files. So to save all their code in a single location, they will be using the source code tools. What is the main advantage of this is, once we save our code here, next time whenever there is a change to that code, whatever the changes are there, that complete history will be tracked by this source code management tools. you can see here that is called as commits here. So every time we save our code, one commit will be created. So whenever we open a commit, you can see the changes happen to that source code. So along with the source code, they are maintaining the history also, whatever the changes are there. So let's say I have implemented a new feature. So whatever the older core is there, I will just remove that and I will do a cross checking. Let's say I have kept a local backup of that one, like some underscore backup or like that. Once the product is ready and it is available and even the testing team people pass that one and it's moved to the production, let's say 1 or 2 months of usage of the new functionality, let's say their environment is getting crashed because of my new functionality. For the immediate fix, what they ask us is to go back to the older feature. So the source code is already deleted by us, right? And even it is not understandable after 2 or 3 months what is the file names we have given to the older code. So that's why here as it is provided with the clear comments of the functionality and what are the particular changes, I can revert back to this particular commit. It's just like going back to the timeline and I can directly deploy that. So I don't need to again research on finding the older code. It's already available because the history is maintained by the source code management. So this particular feature is common in all the source code management tools. But there is one more major difference in the coming source code management tools called as how the data is being saved. Let's say I have some I don't need paint, just notepad is also enough. Let's say I have a 10 GB of source code. Understood? Let's have, instead of making it hypothetical, let's say I am having 2 GB of source code. So this complete source code in the first case of centralized virtual control system, I will save this in some SVN URL, SVN server repo. Okay, the 2 GB source code. So if the developer want to use only the first 2 features, what they will do is he will fetch only those particular files, the file set and folders from this SVN server, and they will do the changes to that one and he will sync back to the central server. The same thing happens with the second person in a different workstation. He will fetch only his particular commits, or he will get any new commits added by other users, update the repository and get back the updated contents to on his working machine. He will get only the working copy every time, only some set of files. If the complete source code is 2 GB, he will get only 100 MB or like that. He won't get the complete history. He will get only the current working copy and only the some set of files which he required. Once his work is done, he will commit back to the server. This is fine. So none of the customers who is having so say let's say my development team is 50 members, none of the 50 members are having the complete source code. They are having only the working copy. So in the event, let's say the server crashes, the SVN server, and my source code is gone, then it is completely gone. This is the single point of failure. If the server is gone, everything will be gone. Understood? But in case of distributed version control system, instead of getting the working copy, every time they will get the complete copy of the repo. So first when they download, they will get the complete copy of the repository. So all the 50 members will be having this 2 GB source code, not just the 100 MB. In the 2 GB source code, they can switch to that 100 MB workspace and they can do the changes and they can do the local commits. Once they are done, they can push back to the central repository. Central repository also they will be having the main copy. Other than that, every individual user is having their individual repositories. You see? So from these individual repositories on their machines, they will get a working copy and they will do the updations and they will send back to the repository. So this is fine. So in case if any of if the main server is lost, we can fetch the copy from any of the 50 members available and make the server up and running on a different, make the repository up and running on a different server or on the same server once it is up, once it is reformatted or like that. So this is the advantage here. So in the central working system, there is a single point of failure. That is the disadvantage. That is covered in distributed version control system. But in the distributed version control system, the single point of failure is succeeded, but unnecessarily there is so much of data transfer and downloading, right? They need to download the complete working copy. Of course, it is only one time, because next time onwards they just need to do the pull and push changes. But let's say if you are all of the teams are working on a single environment in office systems or in the restricted systems, then it is fine. But in this era of work from home, you cannot trust the person to completely, who is holding the complete source code. He can misuse that and you can send it to some other person. So those things will be handled by Citrix Xenap environments and all, where the copy paste, the clipboard thing, everything will be restricted. But the major problem is not this. In the distributed control system, the data transfer rate, they need to have the complete copy. It is an advantage to the central system, and also it's kind of disadvantage. So whichever is feasible to the part of teams, they will pick the repositories. So smaller teams, mostly they will pick SVN server, where the multiple persons are working remotely. Now in this era, as the data transfer is very minimal now, because everyone is using 4G technologies and all, the SVN usage people are very few now. It's like 10% of the market, if the 90% is the GitHub. Okay, and even so, coming to this repository type is the Git repository. The server where we are saving this, our repository, that server is provided by multiple vendors. One is by github.com, that is the GitHub public repository. You can upload directly our source code to the github.com. There we have public and private repositories. Public means it will open to all. Private means it's limited, and we need to pay if we want multiple private repositories. So organization generally buy a private account here. Even more secure one, GitHub Enterprise. In GitHub Enterprise, github.com people will give their server software, server GitHub software to the companies like TCS or Infosys, like that. So this TCS, Infosys people, instead of using the GitHub server, they will install that server software in their own machines or on their AWS clouds or anywhere, so that they will have full access to the server and they don't have any data limitations and all. Because in github.com, whenever you are syncing your source code, the individual file size will be 150 MB max, and at 100 MB you will get a warning. If it is GitHub Enterprise, you can upload 1 GB, 2 GB, but it's your company's perspective. So here the complete control is went to GitHub Enterprise, and GitHub Enterprise, they will be charged for that software, and in github.com they will be charged for using their server. So these are the two features available in GitHub. Another one is Atlassian Bitbucket. This is also uses Git only, but the server is a third party server, Atlassian Bitbucket. Here you mean to say, here Atlassian people, they have installed GitHub Enterprise on their servers, and they are providing services to other people like github.com. Understood? It's just like a mediator kind of. So this is so far, and the images and all these things I have taken from internet, from this set of URLs. If you have the recording, you can open these URLs and you can see the documentations there. And as part of the course, I will be having a blog, which one I have created like 2 to 3 years before, where mostly I will be keeping the notes and even the production issues also with their solutions. Let's say this is Jenkins. Whenever people are trying to set up their own lab environment, these are the most common issues they will be getting. You can just open them based on the title and you can go through the solution. This is open. It's not only for me. You can distribute it to the other trainers also. They can provide it to their students. Okay. So far this is the overview of the course. So any doubts and inputs from you guys? Hello?
And sir, what is this OpenShift?
Yeah, it's OpenShift is, see, one thing is Docker is the main runtime being used. Okay. For a individual person who is just working on the Docker environment, he will be accessing only one Docker servers. So when multiple Docker servers are involved and when we want to distribute our container creation, like let's say our application is running, the resources in first server is almost completed. So directly there should be another software which will be telling to our application to use the resources of the second system and create the containers there. So this is called as scaling up. This scaling up will be taken care by the Kubernetes, mostly the main advantage of that one. So the Kubernetes is a free product provided by Google. So every Kubernetes product, they are having their own implementation. Let's say if you want to install a Kubernetes on your local server, you can install KubeADM, use it with KubeADM, and you can set up Kubernetes. If you want to use a cloud service like AWS or Amazon, they have done modifications to that UI, and instead of directly using Kubernetes dashboard, you will be using Azure dashboard to access the background Kubernetes. Why they have done that is, it will be more simpler there. You can simply click on create Kubernetes and you can directly use that one. Here what happened is, Azure portal is acting as a mediator between you and Kubernetes, and Azure is handling all the complex activities and giving you to a minimal interface. Similarly, to simplify this with another solution, this Ansible product team, the Red Hat people, what they have done is, they have created another tool called as OpenShift. What OpenShift does is, it acts as a mediator, or it acts as a front end to the Kubernetes. If you want to install a Kubernetes, you can create only one cluster here. If you want to create multiple clusters and do the integration between them, it's a more complicated task and all. But in OpenShift, you can spin up the clusters so fast, multiple clusters, and you can use that very easily. Understood? So the Kubernetes is free one, but OpenShift is an interface on top of that. But to use that interface, you need the Red Hat subscription. For few users, like 10 to 15 systems for development and testing purposes, you can use OpenShift for free by getting the Red Hat subscription. But if you want to deploy it to the enterprise environment, we need to pay them, to the OpenShift people. Okay. So if you are using any cloud environment, you don't need OpenShift. You will directly use the cloud services. If you are using your local server environment, you will be using OpenShift. So the startups generally they will use Kubernetes only. OpenShift will be used majorly from the service-based companies like TCS and all, where they will be handling multiple customers parallelly in the same environment. So for different customers, they want to keep it separately. So let's say I am a TCS guy. I am having a project in some pharmaceutical company, and I am having one more project came from banking systems, new project. So I am having existing environment in OpenShift in my servers for the banking pharma company. So for the banking company, if I am using OpenShift, I can simply use the settings and create a single cluster directly on a different copies of server. I don't need to do the implementation from scratch. But if it is a bare Kubernetes, you need to do the configurations every time, because Kubernetes clustering is a bit complicated. So to ease this process, this OpenShift came. As they are using our process, they are charging for that one. Okay. And hello.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is
So you mean to say OpenShift is used for on-premises only?
No. You can deploy to the cloud also. But what happening is, if you are for individual clouds, it's basically the cost perspective. Let's say I'm using the Kubernetes service of AWS. Okay. In AWS we have only Fargate. We don't have direct Kubernetes service. Let's say EKS it is there, Elastic Kubernetes Service.
Yes.
In Azure it will be AKS. The marketing thing is different. So thing is, if you are using EKS or AKS, it's simplified there, but you will be charging based on the number of containers you are using. Understood? So let's say if you are spinning up hundreds of containers daily and destroying them, your bill will be more if you are using EKS. Understood? So in that case, what you will do is, you will use ECS or you will use just EC2 instances, and you will install your own Kubernetes on top of that. In that case, what happened is that Kubernetes is not being handled by AWS. You are handling that, but the billing will be reduced there. So if for production activities where you are having very few containers which will be running in the background directly, which you are providing to the customers, you can use EKS. But for development environments, who will be deleting and destroying and creating containers in every very few minutes, in that case the bill will be more there. So in that case, you need your own that complete cloud environment should be managed by you. Understood? So you will be spinning up everything in the EC2 instances. So if you are using the EC2 instances, again you need the orchestration for that one. So in that case, you can directly install the Kubernetes there, or you can install the OpenShift there. That's your perspective. Because OpenShift is based on the subscription model, not on the number of servers you are using. It's like you are using that product, you have purchased that product, you can they will be giving you some limit on the number of systems. That limit, in that limit you can use them directly. So it's completely based on the analytical strategy of billing mostly involved. Understood? The same OpenShift license you can use for local on-premise, and the same OpenShift license you can use on your EC2 instances also. But if you go to the Fargate, you don't need that OpenShift. Of course, you can link with that Fargate, but no one is using that, because this Fargate UI is far simpler than OpenShift. Okay.
So presently the companies are moving towards OpenShift or Kubernetes?
See, Kubernetes is there in OpenShift also. Understood? But here what happening is, see, let me show you in Paint. This is Docker, right? Docker runtime. Let's say you have multiple Docker containers. So what you will do is, you will create a Kubernetes cluster. Short we will call as K8s for that one. This is bare minimum. In OpenShift, what happens is, they will be using Kubernetes cluster internally. Understood? So whatever request you are creating, internally OpenShift will pass it to Kubernetes cluster, and Kubernetes cluster will maintain these Docker containers. Docker or Kite, another container is there called Kite, but Docker is mainly useful. So what I am telling is, if it is a single cluster, it is not that useful, that OpenShift. But if you are using multiple clusters, కరెంట్ నెట్ పోయిందరా? సరే చూడు, మీటింగ్లో ఉన్నప్పుడు పోయింది. Yeah, my internet got disconnected, so I
I
reconnected.
am unable to hear that. Kiran. What is the issue with Uday Kiran?
Yeah, he's back.
Yeah, so guys, uh, my internet got disconnected, so that's
Javedi,
yeah,
Yes, you can start from Docker.
yeah, yeah. So, so if you are maintaining multiple Kubernetes clusters, then OpenShift is useful. Understood? If it is a single cluster,
So one more time, I missed that. What you are saying something?
so see, uh, if you are using a single Docker container, one or two containers, you don't need Kubernetes also. You can just directly run the Docker commands on your system. If you are maintaining multiple containers and you are scaling up and down, then you will be using Kubernetes cluster for that one. So this is the cluster, and in this one you will be using Docker containers internally, because here these Docker containers will be, we will just send a request to the Kubernetes, and that will take care of creation and deletion of these Docker containers. So here OpenShift, what happens is, it is given as one more UI instead of directly connecting to the Kubernetes. One more level of abstraction here. So here we don't need to think about internals of Kubernetes cluster. Simply in the OpenShift portal, we'll send the request. It will directly create the clusters or Docker containers or anything. So if it is a single Kubernetes container, we can simply, if it is a single cluster, we can directly use the Kubernetes. If there are multiple clusters, OpenShift is easier to use. Understood? So it's basically, it depends on the project. If the project contains multiple customers and all of them to be managed in the single servers, then we will be using this OpenShift, so that we can create separate clusters for each and every customers. Understood? And also it depends on the license also. Let's say if the company is a completely new to us, this container system, and they are and they don't want to invest much onto the POCs, or if they don't want to invest much on these OpenShift licenses and all, they may tell to do this clusterization manually. Okay. So OpenShift is the main just user interface. We need to mostly consider on Kubernetes only, because internally OpenShift also using the Kubernetes only. Understood? There is one more product called as OpenStack, that is different. That is for maintaining the complete infrastructure. It will be handling multiple ESX servers, and even it will be linking to the AWS EC2. So whenever user asks for a particular machine, it will directly create a new machine and send it to him. It's like a OpenStack is kind of creating your own cloud environment. That is different. The OpenShift is for orchestration for maintaining multiple Kubernetes servers. Okay. So any doubts, guys?
Sir, can you please explain about this Docker architecture?
Okay. Okay. So in a simple way, what I meant to say is Docker container orchestration, container architecture. Let's say I have an application. Let's say some Tomcat server. So what I will do is, first on my Windows 10 machine, to make it as a development environment, I will be using a VirtualBox or hypervisor. So what this hypervisor does is, it's one kind of software where instead of directly installing the see, in my laptop I am running only one Windows 10 operating system. So what this hypervisor, I mean the VirtualBox does is, it acts as a mediator, and on top of it I can install multiple machines, Windows 7, Windows 10, Prometheus, Minikube, like that. So all Linux environments. So this hypervisor software, on top of this I can segregate to multiple machines, and whatever the request I am getting here, that will be, this hypervisor will be sent to this hypervisor, that hypervisor will be sent to this Windows 10, and it will translate that to the direct operating system calls to the hardware. So if I want to use the webcam on this virtual machine, what I can do is, to the end user he will directly use it as a normal operating system, but whenever he sends a request, in the background that will be sent to the hypervisor, and this hypervisor uh, will translate that to the direct hardware calls using this main operating system, physical operating system we call as, and will send back to that one. So that is the case. So in this scenario, let's say I want to use some Tomcat version 9, okay, and on this one I am hosting my application, let's say some app1. So because of this what implementation of virtualization, I can host this on multiple virtual machines parallelly, okay. So on the same machine I will be having 3 different copies of Tomcat running of my application, so that I am having the test environment. But the so this is good if we are doing majority of the operations on this virtual machine. But let's say the main task of this virtual machine I implemented here is only to run that application 1. If that is the only task, then I am unnecessarily providing a 2 GB RAM, let's say, then I am unnecessarily providing a 4 GB of RAM to that one, a 50 GB of storage to that one unnecessarily. So only for application 1, even that application is not running now, let's say it is not passing any request, till that still that operating system will be using that 4 GB RAM, that hard disk, all that resources, network resources and all, because background process will be running. So to run that application, I am creating a new operating system completely. Instead of that one, what we can do is, we can use the concept of Docker. Here what happens is, in these Docker containers, I don't need to provide any separate hard disk or separate RAM for that one. So, and even I can run them directly on top of a VM also. Let's say this is the mission, and in this one I have installed Docker software, Docker runtime, and on top of that one I will be because of this Docker software I am having multiple softwares now. One is Docker CLI to run the commands, another one is Docker server, which is running in the background. So whatever commands we send, that will be taken care by this Docker server. So this Docker server, what it will do is, it will give us an option of containers, okay. So in this container I will just keep this app1 and Tomcat, not more than that. Understood? And the advantages of these containers is, I am not giving any RAM to that one, and I am not giving any separate hard disk storage to that one, okay. So here the hypervisor is taking care of the VMs, here the Docker server is taking care of these containers. Here in these containers, the only resource I am allocating to them is the port number. Let's say the first, if I directly install this app1 on the machine, it will be using 8080 port. Here in Tomcat app1, what happens is, whatever the files I kept for this separate Docker container, all those will be running separately in a separate sandbox kind of, in some C. If it is Windows Docker, you will be running in C program data like that. If it is a Ubuntu, it will be var lib docker like that in that folders. So this application files, they don't have direct access to the operating system. So whatever changes I am doing in this container, it doesn't affect the main operating system like the VM. So whenever the application is running, at that time whatever the resources required for that application, the space or the process RAM or anything will be taken at that point of time. So if there are any requests, then only that application will be running, and that application will use the resources at that time. So with the minimum amount of resources, I can run this application directly. So but in this container, this Docker container is dedicated only for that application. And in the background, how does it works is, whenever there is a, let's say for this Tomcat 8.1, I have agent port number 9000. So whenever see, let's say the main application configuration file I kept 8080. So when I kept on top of the container, what happens is this container will be copied to the Docker. This is, let's say this is Docker runtime. This Docker runtime, what it will do is, instead of inside this container, it will use 8080 port. But outside, to access this container, Docker runtime will give me another port, let's say some 9000. So whatever the request for the container will be there. So whenever any web request, that localhost or that port number I sent, the HTTP request, let's say, to access this application, server 1, where the Docker software is installed, I will give the request to 9000. So when this 9000 port is visualized, this complete 9000 port is being handled by the Docker runtime now. So this request will be sent to the Docker runtime. So this Docker runtime will cross check which port is assigned to which container. So this 9000 is assigned to this app1 container. So this request will be sent to this app1 in this container. So whatever the request coming to this 9000 port, and once it is sent to this container, that will be passed to the 8080 port here, and that application is processed and again sent back to the Docker runtime, and Docker runtime will redirect that one. So this is the abstraction done by the Docker runtime. So in this case, so the same application one I can deploy to multiple containers. Okay. So this is overview, and more details like how that Docker is running, how the Docker commands are running in the background, and how the container base image is created, and how can we customize the existing base images from the existing container. All those I will tell when we start the main concept. Okay. So clear, guys? Hello?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So any doubts?
So sir, how many containers you can create per host?
So it depends on the host actually. It's so there is based on the number of resources available and based on the availability of the port numbers. Understood? So how many port numbers are available, those many containers you can create. Here the scaling up will be done by us directly. So if you want to in Kubernetes part, what happens is the scaling will be taken care by the Kubernetes instead of us.
No. Why it depends on the port numbers? Actually, it should depend upon the hardware resources, right?
No. See, let's say I am running Tomcat with 8080 port number, right, on the direct machine. So if I want to assign it to, if I want to create a container, instead of using 8080, I will be using a different port, 9000, 9001, like that. There is no limit in that port numbers, like till 10,000 you can create. So your limit is 10,000 containers. But
Why 10,000? We have ports like 65,000.
I mean, you can you have
Like total ports, you can assign to 65,536 something,
you
right?
have some port numbers specifically created for internal purposes, right? You cannot use 80 port here because 80 port is for the internal HTTP requests. So you can assign only the port numbers which are not allocated for the system resources. Okay.
Yes, yes.
That's why it's and one more thing is you don't need to worry about the port number also. If you want to if you specifically mention in the Docker command line the particular port number, it will create that 9000 there. But if you don't provide any, then the Docker runtime will provide you the available port number directly. Okay. And
So it will assign random port number.
yeah, if you don't provide the port number, it will assign randomly. Understood? And one more thing is all the containers don't require the port number, right? Let's say here your app1 is a web application, so that's why as you are accessing from the browser you need this port number, right? But let's say I have another database container where it will be installing some Postgres will be using 5432 port number. So and that Postgres you won't be accessing directly, it will be accessed by this app1, right? So in that case, instead of if the direct user want access to this Postgres, then you need an exposed port number here. But as it is being used only internally between the containers, you don't need an external port number there. Understood? So you just need to create a custom network between these two containers so that it can directly access this with 5432. Understood? So here the port number is also saved if you create a custom network between these two, and only one container is exposed directly. Okay. By default when you install the Docker server, one virtual network will be created. So whatever the Docker containers you are creating, all will be available in the single virtual network. So if you want to separate them, you can create multiple virtual networks there between the Docker containers. Okay. And of course it's dependent on resources, I do accept that, but Docker won't provide you any error there. It will simply crashes the container if the process is not running. Let's say if you are having a 2 GB RAM machine, if you open some 100 documents at a time, you won't get any warning messages or like that. Your machine crashes simply. The same thing happens here also. If you want to handle that resource management correctly, then we need to go with this Kubernetes cluster management or Docker Swarm for simplicity. Okay. And one more limitation of Docker is you cannot run the Docker with the GUI applications. Let's say you install Tomcat server, the server will be running in that container, but if you want to if you install some VLC player there, you can't launch the VLC player in that, the UI won't be available. Understood? So this is only for command line based and mostly the background process and background services. So
you mean to say we can deploy only without GUI applications?
Yeah, without GUI applications. You can install them, but you cannot access the GUI. Understood?
Okay, for that we need to go for Kubernetes?
No. Not Kubernetes. Kubernetes is just an orchestration. Docker is only for command line based applications and the services and the see Tomcat, you see Tomcat you are accessing through your web browser, but are you accessing any Tomcat shortcuts there like double clicking and all? No, right? Only through commands you are accessing that. So there is another alternate tool provided by Microsoft, because see, first of all, Docker is only created having Linux as a perspective, not as a Windows. Windows, they implemented it from past 2-3 years. Okay, so Windows, they know that Docker is not having the GUI support. So that's why what they have done is they created one more product which is there earlier also. They added it more features now, called as AppV. AppV is also a container concept kind of thing that is only for GUI applications, not for CLI. Understood? Only GUI. Because here the entry point will be a shortcut. Understood? And definitely people are trending to the cloud environments now. They are accessing everything through the browser now. So they are not much considerate about this one. Understood? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so any doubts, guys?
What is this namespaces and C groups in Docker?
It means like you are asking me to complete the Docker course in a single session, man.
No, I have read regarding the Docker, so I have that doubt. So
See, you have Docker namespaces is the background technology what it is uses for separating the containers. Okay, here what happens is in the Linux operating system, whenever you log into a machine, every process will be having access to the complete file system. Okay, based on the, let's say if you are an admin user, root user say, and you are running an application using root, so you will be having a highest privileges, right? So when you launch the application, your application, let's say it is pointing to this folder. Okay, F1. Similarly, you created one more application called app2. It is also pointing to this folder bin. So when I am running normally, both this app1 and app2 will be pointing to the same folder, and whatever modifications are they are doing, they are combinedly doing to the same folder, right? Hello?
okay.
So but in Linux there is a concept called as namespaces, where what happened is instead of providing direct access to the operating system file system, they can create a namespace for this app bin2 so that it won't touch this /bin. See, if I want to change this to bin to bin1 or something, that complete code I need to change. I need to modify the source code. But let's say I have only app2 executable now available. So then what I will do is, instead of using this bin, I will create a separate namespace pointing to this another folder, let's say some bin2, and that namespace will be regarded as bin folder to this app2. So whenever app2 is launched with this particular namespace, internally it is using bin2, but to app2 it will treat it as bin folder. Understood? So in that way, multiple applications you can create a separate file systems, separate folders, and whatever the file operations done by one application won't do any problem to the another application, because they are separated, their folders are separated. So the Docker runtime in the background, it is using the same namespace concept. Understood? Understood. So this is just an overview. If you want to create namespaces and all, we need to know the C language API and all. Even I also don't know that. Understood?
What about this C groups, sir?
What?
It comes under networking C groups.
C groups? You mean in the Docker?
Yeah, Docker C.
Why you use that one? Means what is your doubt exactly?
Does it comes under C groups? What is that C groups? When I was configuring something like
Control
Kubernetes, I
groups.
got C groups from error.
That is control groups.
Yeah, control group.
That is for security between the containers. Like let's say if you are creating an application, if it is a Tomcat application and all, you are not accessing any system resources, hardly you will be saving some files, right? But let's say you have created a graphic driver which will be connecting to the kernel and modifying your hardware drivers, right? So in that case, we need to restrict the permissions given to that Docker, and because internally, even if it is accessing to a different namespaces, the hardware will be same, right? So that's why to provide the limitations to that container to access only specific things. See, let's say you are testing an application. You want that application to only read the contents from that hardware driver. So, but you don't know how the developer wrote the code because it is in the testing phase. And if you run that one by mistake because of any hardware loop and because of his logic missing in the hardware, let's say he is reformatting the driver, reinstalling that one, then your hardware will be destroyed, right? So that's why what we will do is, instead of completely, even the developer will write that code limitation there, but as a cross check, what we will do is we will limit the resources to the control groups also, so that even the developer try to access that, because of the control groups he cannot access that hardware resource. Okay. I just showed an example, but that is not limited to this virtual video card driver or anything. It will be for networks also, networks and many other resources just based on the your feasibility. Okay.
Sir, if I restart the containers, does the data is lost?
See, your Docker container data will be saved in the Docker folder in the namespaces there only. But what you need to do is, whenever you run the container, your complete data will be stored in the binary format, like in a WinZip kind of file, RAR kind of file. So whatever data is there in the container, that is saving there only. It is saving outside only. So if you stop and start the container, the same container, the data will be there. Understood? But let's say if you want to copy that file data to another Docker container, you cannot directly copy that. Understood? Because that is from outside, it is not in a readable format. It's in a different format. It is only accessible inside the container. So in that case, what we will do is, we will map the outside folders to this Docker container, so that let's say whatever data coming to this bin app1 folder, I will tell that it should be copied to C lib my folder, something like that. So when I map this one, so this complete data will be copied to this folder. So whatever configuration changes you are doing here, that will be saved here. So then you can open that my folder and copy from there. So this concept of mapping the folder is called as volume binding. Okay. Volumes and bind maps.
It is called as volume.
And two options are there. One is volumes, another one is bind maps.
Bind apps. What is that?
Bind maps. Bind mounts. Sorry, bind mounts.
Like mount points.
Yeah.
Bind.
Volume mount and bind mount. Two different are there. But volume mount is the most preferred one. Bind map is a bit complicated one and dependent on the system also. If you run the bind map on a Windows based container, you need to allow the access to the file sharing also, or from outside. Their volume sharing is more simpler. Okay. So any doubts?
Sir, where we will be using this ESXi servers?
See, if you are having some 32 GB RAM laptop, right? Let's say, there to have a multiple virtual machines, you will be installing this virtual box, right? I guess. So now let's say all your team members is having only 2 GB RAM machines and some 80 GB hard disk, old systems, and to ease for your development process, what I will do is, instead of upgrading all your RAMs, what I will do is I will buy a single VMware cluster. It's a hardware. Even Dell is producing that. It's like that single. It's like you can visualize it as a CPU, single CPU. That CPU, I will go and keep in that server room, and I will keep a network interface there. So there what happens is, in that CPU, I won't install any Windows 10. See, for Windows VirtualBox, what I need Windows 10 first, and on top of that I need to install VirtualBox, right? Here instead of that, what I will do is, I will directly install VMware ESXi. It is an OS, it's a Linux OS, embedded inside with VMware product.
Is it a virtualization layer or operating system directly?
So here, if it is a direct virtualization layer, you need a base operating system also in the background.
Okay, so directly it is a OS.
So here what happened is, here it is a virtualization layer, that VMware product, but instead of along with that virtualization layer, they are giving an operating system also. It's a pre-installed Linux operating system. You will directly
It is a
install this.
virtualization layer with an operating system.
Yeah, this complete operating system you will install in the CPU. And let's say to this CPU, as it is connected to network, you got some IP address like 10.0.1.1. Understood? So from your laptop, which is having IP address like 10.0.1.2, I will access the CPU directly in the browser, HTTP. Earlier they provided a desktop application, now they are providing browser directly, 10.0.1.1. So here it will open an interface, you will log in with your credentials, and all the VMs will be showing in the, if you create any VMs, it will be showing in the browser itself. If not, you can create a VM from here, from this website itself. So once you create a VM here, it will generate its own IP address, right? That one you can access from your laptop. Understood? So the VM is being created in this server, but you are using from your laptop. So it's like a central server, so that all the team members can utilize that one. So
these are like licensed? ESXi is a license?
Yeah. It's licensed. Actually, ESXi is the product. Earlier we can install on normal CPUs also, but as that it's a critical server, right? As multiple people are using, so you cannot simply keep it near our desks. So what they are doing is, they are connected with hardware vendors like Dell. What Dell people will do is, they will create a separate CPU, a square shaped one, with racks. They are called as racks, and we will keep them in the iron shelves kind of thing, where we will connect to the network and keep it in some AC room, that server room you want to mention as in the companies. So it will be running continuously, and multiple AC switches, all this will be there every time to cool this server. So it's most sophisticated device, a costly one, not it's bit costlier than the normal one. So if you want to buy a VMware ESXi product, you don't need to contact VMware. You can directly contact the Dell people. They will provide you this ESXi license plus the hardware also, the CPU also, and they will come and install. That is one option. And if you want just VMware license, you can purchase from the ESXi also. And this ESXi is having you can register with the vmware.com just with a normal account, and there you can apply for trial version. They will give you a 30 days trial version for only this software. You can install this software directly in the available CPUs directly, so they can use that one. You don't need to separately buy the hardware also. Existing gold CPUs also you can use them. Understood?
Okay, if you have a good hardware CPU, we can install in that also.
Yeah, and you are having 30 days trial version. If you are just using for development purposes, I can show you how to reset that also. I can come back to the day one of that 30 days for free of cost. But I don't suggest it for production issues. For production, they might go for auditing, and they will check the logs and you might be tracked.
Okay, if you have the license key, then is it possible
No, no.
for more than 1 month? Just if you have the license key.
So see, license key you need to purchase. Okay. Uh, if you don't want to purchase, you can get a license key for 30 days. You don't need license key, just install that VMware product. It will directly come for 30 days. Like see, if you install Windows 10, one option is you need to enter the license details and it will be activated, right? Another option is you won't provide the license details and you will get a 30 days 30 days or 60 days, 60 days I think, 60 days trial version, right? The same thing happens here also. If you don't provide the license details, you will get 60 days trial period.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's a Linux operating system only, completely, but a minimal one. All the repositories like app, yum, all these are disabled in that one. Only the ESXi product will be there. And you can connect it with SSH, some putty-r, shell prompt like that. I can show you. Means you can install that ESXi product on top of VirtualBox also, just to show the UI, because installing a VM inside a VM is a more complicated thing. It
Yeah,
won't
it
fast.
should become nested VM.
Yeah, but for that you need to enable the hardware virtualization on the CPU, but still it will be slower because you are accessing a VM from another VM, right? So it's better, my suggestion is, if you want to set up that, you can simply, in the DevOps diary I shared you the link, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have given tutorials for using ESXi also. How to set up the boot options and all. These are mostly used. It's simple. The operating system installation is very simple. You will get an ISO file.
What's the latest version of ESXi now? 7?
No. vSphere is 7.
vSphere 7, yeah.
vSphere is like Kubernetes to Docker. Understood? vSphere is to handle multiple ESXi servers.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And for that again there will be a separate licensing.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But that one you can, it generally uses a VM inside a ESXi server. You don't need a separate that one. It is just an orchestration, right? And that setup is also very simple. But you need a AD environment for that one again. Okay? So any doubts?
Yeah, sir. This Jenkins pipeline, so everything we can do in Azure DevOps.
Yeah, Azure DevOps. So see, here Azure DevOps, what happens is, they will be charging you for pipeline run. Understood? So in Azure DevOps, you need to, in Jenkins, you need to connect different machines with the concept of nodes, right? Hello? In the Azure DevOps also, there is a nodes concept, but it will use the Azure virtual machines. If you want to use one of your local virtual machine, connect to that Azure DevOps server, you will be charged for per node. Understood? Per node they will be charging this much amount, like that. So if you are using Azure DevOps, use all the Azure resources. Understood?
Okay.
And Azure DevOps, it's more, it's like they are bringing different tools of DevOps to a single product, so that everything will be managed by a single product with single license. Understood? Because in Azure DevOps, you don't need a GitHub also. They are providing Azure repos. When you purchase Azure DevOps, with that licensing, with that plan details, they are giving you some amount of Azure repositories space for free, like that. So just a marketing strategies. And even in AWS also you have a similar concept. Cloud pipeline. It is called as cloud pipeline. So just and even in Google Cloud also they have, but Google Cloud is mostly famous for this Kubernetes, not for other services. other services, uh, uh, AWS or Azure is far better, because as a competition to AWS, Azure is decreasing so many uh, prices also. Let's say if you are creating a VM for server 2012 on AWS machine, you will be charged like some $4, $5 like that, even if it is an Indian servers. But in Azure, you will get it for 15 rupees, 16 rupees like that per hour. The cost is very less in Azure.
Okay. So recently I've installed Jenkins.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I have not I have not got this way like customize Jenkins. They will be having two options like install suggested plugins and select plugins to install.
Yeah.
That page I did not want, but directly it landed to the welcome Jenkins page.
Maybe you selected the default steps and default plugins got installed. You can
No, I
install.
have not selected any. Customize Jenkins page is not displayed, I'm saying.
You installed using Docker or you installed directly?
No, directly on my
Windows machine or Linux?
yeah, Linux on Linux.
Linux you installed with the apt repository, apt-tm repository, or you downloaded the WAR file and deployed in the Tomcat?
No, without WAR file.
Yeah, okay. So in that case, you can go to the manage plugins section and select the plugins from there if you want. If any new plugins, unnecessary plugins installed, you can uninstall from there also.
Yeah, but directly log into the admin user. So how do I need to set that admin username and password?
See, admin username and password, you will get that password in one Jenkins file only.
Yeah, I got that.
Later what you can do is in the Jenkins manage section, there will be an option to create a new user.
Yeah, new user. But admin user I cannot create one more time.
Yeah, you can create. It will ask while creating the user itself.
Because
Will ask.
Not got the option. Yeah, there won't be any problem, right?
Yeah,
because of this Jenkins.
No, there won't be any
installation plugins.
There won't be any problem.
Whatever plugins we require, we need to install those plugins. Right?
Yeah. So the most common thing is this email AXT that is required, because at the end of every job you need to get an email notification, right? And what is the purpose of using that? You are deploying it to any production environment, or you created on your testing purpose?
Testing.
Okay.
So that page has not been landed, so that is the reason I was confused.
Okay. So what you can do is,
if you want to reset the password of that admin user, where can I do that?
It will be available in that configuration file itself directly. You can open that if you are connected to
SSH. There will be that .xml file. The port number will be changing there.
Yeah. 1 minute. See, these locations we don't remember generally. Wait. Because these are all one-time tasks. The locations and all. Okay, I didn't add here. You can directly search. Yeah, Jenkins password is the setting file. Understood?
Sorry?
1 minute. I hope you used it like this with the apt-get command, right?
Yes.
In this file it is there.
Valid Jenkins. Yeah, I was seeing that XML file.
Yeah. Here in this initial admin password, not on valid Jenkins, here this file. The password will be there here. Here in the valid Jenkins, you have the usernames. The initial password will be there here. Warlib Jenkins secrets.
Yeah, initial admin.
So in this file it is.
Yeah, this will be one time only it will be launched, right? No,
This
if
is
I want to change it again, I have to go and I have to change this location.
no. This is the initial admin password. So the default
Oh.
admin password which you are getting, that is this one.
Yes, yes. From this location only, I have copy pasted that.
And later you can modify that users from the UI itself. You don't need to go to configuration file.
Okay, okay. So while I was configuring email notifications, I need this admin username and password.
No,
right?
no, 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 no. You need while configuring username and password, you need your Gmail or your Outlook email passwords, not this one.
Not Jenkins. Okay, okay.
Jenkins is just for connecting for you through the portal.
Okay. Okay, sir. Thank you. Is there anything you would like to share?
You guys, any doubts you guys
Configuration
have?
management regarding?
Yeah, we will discuss that slowly because it is almost 1 o'clock. That's why.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, then thank you. Thanks for the session. It was a wonderful session.
Thank you, and hope you guys should call me back as early as possible because I am planning for a new batch also. That's why.
Yeah, those things our management Swati she will call you.
Okay, sure. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bye. guys.
Thanks for the session.
Okay. Thank you, Prashant, and thank you, Javed, Shahid, bye, everyone. Bye. Bye, guys.